in that kind of case, it would probably exceed most developers that I know as far as like actual writing of code. Do not accept like less than 100% test coverage. Try to push and see how far the agent can go.
Hi everyone, my name is Artem Astranian. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're going to talk about AI agents, agentic coding, testing, reliable software development, and how all of these things can work together, or whether they can work together at all. My guest today is Shep Alderson. Shep has been in the industry for over 15 years, working as a software developer and site reliability engineer. He has worked with companies ranging from large tech companies to small startups. And he also worked at GitHub in the past, and today he manages hundreds of Kubernetes clusters. Shep, welcome. Really happy to have you here, and thanks for joining to discuss these very exciting topics today.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for the introduction.
Thanks. And I would like to kick off this episode, this podcast, with my analogy for the current situation in the industry. That is that AI for developers is similar to the invention of the gun, I think. And why so? Well, once the revolver was involved, then, suddenly the rules of the game changed. And so is my first question to you. Is AI really changing the playing field for developers at all levels? And if so, how exactly?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I would say when it comes to the changes, we see a lot of effects, I think, at the top and the bottom of the spectrum of skill levels. So for example, if you're newer in the field, it might be a little bit harder to get that first job or that first gig to get you started, because people have kind of this expectation of oh, I can just have an agent do it, right? What do I need a developer for? And then at the top end, you have people who are really experienced, people who have been in the industry for 15, 20, 30 years, who are now kind of codifying their experience into the agent and are able to do a lot more. I do think that one of the biggest shifts has been kind of not necessarily how fast we move as an industry, but what we can attempt, what we can try. Right. So my advice for, more junior folks, because those are the folks that I feel are really getting hit real hard right now, is to put some focus into the architectural and fundamental parts of software. Not necessarily as much a focus on the specific syntax. Learn a language. It's great. I think you should just have that skill in general, the way to think in code. But yeah, the software industry in general is shifting so much right now. And in particular, I don't know if businesses have really caught up with it yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, right. Everyone is getting used to have a senior developer in the pocket in a way, right? You can have it, you can ship literally anything, at least on the shelf, literally anything to build very impressive applications in a day. And then you are a business guy, you kind of, okay, I can ship this and this very quickly and prototype. This is, I think, reflects what you just said regarding that we can iterate real quick, but also shouldn't forget about all the components of the professional development and how the really mature production grade product comes after a while. When you develop it, then pure AI development might break. And I remember, so basically our first conversation in our Reddit community, and I will attach the link in this episode in the description so that everyone listening this podcast today can also read and know what is it all about. You wrote something I really liked. Instead of just usual AI hype, you also said, instead of look, it's the model that one should at the Minecraft, you are more interested in this boring process that gets reliable results from almost any model you set. And I think to me, and for I'm sure everyone listening and also taking the software development seriously, this sounds much more useful for real developers. And that's why my next question would be, what does this boring but reliable process looks like in practice?
Yeah, I would say the big focus for me when I'm thinking about what process do I want is how do I codify those best practices that, I've learned over years of experience, oftentimes the hard way by having things break on me. for example, things like test-driven development, which is kind of what we started talking about in that thread. The foundational things around things like writing your tests first. You can tell the agent to do it. It won't do it automatically, but if you tell it to, it'll probably do a pretty good job. Get you some base tests to start with, and then you build from there. Code review processes. So, if I'm just a solo developer, now I can have a couple of code review agents that I can bring in and go through a process with them to make sure that I'm not missing anything, or that my writing agent wasn't missing anything. And so like even at a small scale, like just like one or two people working on a project, you can expand out from, hey, I just want to write something that gets it done, in which you can still do those quick prototypes, and AI is great for that. But you can also then codify that like test-driven development, that, clear documentation. Like I've never had better docs in my software since I started having agents, right?
Right.
It's great. I can have it document like all my functions and how everything works, which honestly, it leads into a better agent outcome as well. Great documentation, great tests, more tests than I would have ever written naturally. Like not just like unit tests, but even like deep complex integration tests, like even from like Playwright or across multiple APIs, you can expand what you can do just as like one or a few people.
Right. Interesting. So what I hear from you is that there are these two components basically. One is kind of a self-managing system on the doc side, on documentation side, building such a self-growing knowledge graph or documentation. Well, many teams I know also connect and power their ticket management system with the docs automatically with AI. And you're right, it's very hard to keep everything maintained perfectly without AI, and AI can just, you hand over all this boring stuff to this structure and to just let AI structure all the boring things, right? And another one that you mentioned is about TDD. I think it's also very interesting. Could you elaborate a bit more about it?
Yeah. So for example, I've been working on a kind of a side project for a family member who runs a business. And they're like, we can't find great software that does really what we want. Like we can kind of get partially there with a few different things. I was like, let's try building something. And of course, if you're just trying to do a prototype, you can probably have it done in a week, maybe two at most. But like, if you want to do it well, you need to probably account for like several months. And so I went into that process thinking, okay, from the beginning, what are our best practices? I know what kind of technologies I want to use. I know what kind of processes I want to use. How do I codify that? And so, for example, in my project, I started from the very beginning with test-driven development. So I have 100% test coverage on all of my unit tests, at least, all of my code, 100% unit test coverage. Then once I started getting UI, built in more Playwright tests. And I'm like, okay, initially it was just a handful. It was just my happy paths. But then I was like, okay, now that I have kind of a solidified UI after like a month or so of working on it, what if I told my agent, hey, go write tests for everything you can find in my UI? And I just let it run for several hours. And I come back and there's like 100 Playwright tests. Do I run those every single time I make a commit? No. I'll do them like at the end when I'm ready to like merge something in, just as a check. But like having those multiple layers, starting with TDD and then having multiple layers of tests has helped me kind of like codify my intent into the app more than just like, does the function work?
Right.
It's easy to do this happy path tests, but like, I want to make sure those edge cases are covered too.
So you really want to dig deeper into every use case, and instead of writing this repetitive routine, almost like a routine test, then you have such a layer of AI that kind of simplifies it. You still control it, or you still make sure that they make sense and that they maybe grow with your code base, but it's still, you delegate a lot to AI. And by the way, you mentioned this TDD, which is test-driven development. Could you maybe briefly also mention what this means in this like classical vanilla sense and how it fits into the AI-driven development?
Yeah, for sure. In the most like classical sense, test-driven development is you think of what you want to happen. You write a test to see that it would happen. Like what would be the ideal case for the outcome? And you run that test. You see, hey, it failed because my code does not do that yet. You then write the smallest amount of code possible to make that test work, to go green. And then you run it again and you see if it's green. And then you write your next test. And ideally you do this very small iteration. When I first started really pushing what agents could do, that was around the Opus 4.5 or GPT 5.2 days. I would tell them, use test-driven development and be like, okay, I can write tests. And then it would write the code and the test at the same time, which was not my intent. Like, I don't need you to just write code that does the exact same thing that you just told the code to do. I want you to write the test first. And so that's where I did actually give some very explicit instructions, like go through the process of writing the test first, seeing it fail. And I actually watch my agent report that it failed, and then it writes my test next, or my code next. So that process helps you codify your intent for the function level.
Yeah, absolutely. Shep is completely right here. It remains relevant regardless of which programming language you use. What is your tech stack? Well, if Python is a significant part of the product you develop, or Python is a main programming language you use, then Pytest is definitely the tool number one for you. And then you have also integrate Pytest into the CI/CD pipelines, for example, with GitHub Actions. All of this I have collected in my complete course for developers. The link is down below. It goes a bit in the direction to what you mentioned right in the beginning, that you still orchestrate it on the level of how the best practices should be established. It's also interesting that you say that you also let agents write your tests. You push the LLMs basically write the tests first, and then, since it is something verifiable, then LLM does the much better job, right? Is there any, I would say, your general concerns about maybe if it is too slow? So how is it about this AI productivity boost here with TDD?
I would say it is still there. It is not some magical 10 or 100x. I'd say it's more like a 1 or 1.5, 2 times modifier. Like it's a bonus, but for me, it's less about what can I do right now as fast as possible. It is what can I do better than I did before. So the better test coverage is what I care about in this particular instance, what we're talking about. And I also kind of like think about tests in kind of different ways. Like if you write them beforehand, then you can actually verify that that test did cover what you thought it did. If you had like my agents first did, where they would write the code and the test at the same time, you never saw that test fail. So you didn't know that it, first off, caught what you were looking for, and B, that it actually, your code did solve that problem. Maybe the code from another part of your app solved that problem, and you won't know that without seeing that fail. So that small granular loop, it does make things run longer. It does use more tokens. I'm not going to say it doesn't, but I'm willing to make that trade-off if it means reliability, particularly when it comes to refactoring. Like refactoring is a whole other world, but like these unit level tests that I get out of TDD really give me like more faith in the refactoring in the future.
That's very interesting, actually, that you mentioned this refactoring. We will come to this in a second. I have another question to you related to the refactoring. But first, regarding these tests, do you use something sophisticated as a tool? Let's say you spawn multiple sub-agents where one agent just writes codes, and then it has some locking mechanism to allow another sub-agent to write the code, and then another one approves, and that goes in a cycle or in a loop in a way. Or it is, let's say, all this common framework like a cloud, and then that's part of your system instructions or a skill.
So I have a number of skills, and one of the things I actually try to do is clear out my skills from time to time, like just to see what the models are capable of, just from the vanilla sense, right? But I do have a set of skills I keep going back to. So a lot of my skills are either directly based on or are like Matt Pocock's skills. If you've ever seen his like Grill Me skill, I think he just released one called Wayfinder, which takes like a big plan and breaks it out into like agent-sized chunks. I do go through like a process as I'm thinking of a new feature where, you know, I'll initially plan it out and I'll have the agent kind of interview me. And then once I get that clear plan, then I can start handing it out to agents. I have an implement skill, which its whole purpose, it's not very long. It's maybe a paragraph and a half. But the whole point of it is don't have the orchestrating agent actually write the code. Its job is just hand things off to subagents. And then when the subagents come back, spawn up a review subagent. Have it review the code separately, different context. Come back with the review. Did you find any gaps in the implementation? Great. Let's spawn up another subagent. And so I'll have it sit there and churn for hours, spawning up multiple subagents over and over again until eventually it goes, okay, the plan has actually been completed because my orchestrator agent is watching for that. So the orchestrator agent, like, for lack of a better term, doesn't have like a dog in the race, if that makes sense. Like, it doesn't care, quote unquote. I know it's like anthropomorphizing, but like, it doesn't care that like the other agents, what they did. Its whole job is, did it get the plan done? Are the features I asked for covered? And yeah, subagents in particular for me, I use them as context management. because like one of my like daily drivers is GPT 5.5. And so 270 something K is like your input that you can do. That's not a ton. It's enough. Like, yes, that's a pretty big file or a lot of tool calls, but breaking it out into sub-agents means I don't ever have to worry about running out. I can stay in kind of that sweet spot where I know the agent's going to perform its best. And yeah, like having agents kind of adversarially work against each other in like implementation and review, I find it works really well.
Right. Also, this concept of context isolation or isolation of the responsibility for AI, right? They will do one thing very well, but if you spread the things around there for doing the job end to end, then it usually fails or might hallucinate really badly.
Mm-hmm.
Even though today there are tons of agents like Codex, Claude, others, they kind of understand internally how to decompose a difficult problem into the sub-problems if it is too big. But I found really interesting what you said, that you carefully plan and then you have this loop between orchestrator and then agents that do the job or write the tests. Are you using some special frameworks or special tools for it, or those are the Codex and Cloud, or some custom solutions here?
So my daily driver is with at least the GPT models. I use my Codex subscription or my ChatGPT subscription with Open Code. I really like Open Code's extensibility. So for example, I can talk about like a custom tool I made for doing PR reviews. I really like the extensibility of Open Code. I wish you could still use your Claude like subscription within Open Code. I know some people have found ways around it, but I don't want to get banned, so I don't use them. I use Claude Code for that, which means, I have to kind of duplicate my skills a little bit, but the skills.sh tooling, that helps me do that pretty easily. And so, yeah, that's my, nothing really special on like, I don't have any like Hermes agent running in the background, running and monitoring things. I keep things as stock as I can and then extend with skills and plugins where I find a need. I think that works really well.
Makes sense. I would like actually to now come back to the question regarding refactoring, because the refactoring, especially considering all the AI-driven development or AI-assisted development, the refactoring is a big thing because the complex legacy systems, they might be super confusing for AI. And even if they don't at the shell, then instead of suggesting a good refactoring solutions or extracting the main point of failure in the system into a separate well-tested component, AI might just continue kind of hacking or continue working in existing spaghetti code. And is it something what this perspective, when you integrate TDD into the AI-driven or AI-assisted development, does it also help from in this perspective? Or you think the developers, engineers always have to orchestrate the things properly and AI might never get the concepts on this architecture level in the right way?
Yeah. So like I've had kind of two very clear experiences. I've had the part where like I'm building a greenfield project and I'm able to do TDD from the very beginning. That makes refactoring very easy. Assuming that when the agent is refactoring, it doesn't touch the tests. That's like one of the things you have to have in like your refactor skill. Don't touch the test, only touch the code. Agents can do a pretty good job of refactoring. And I've done that with, I think it was about a month ago. I just had an RPC file that has just gotten huge. Like it was so many interactions on my API were in this one file. And I was like, this is a nightmare to read into the agent every single time I need to change something on like one part of my API. So I asked it, hey, break this out into different concerns. Each one has its own little contract of like what the API should do. Make sure that that's in that file. Refactor it for me. It churned for hours. I come back and I see, okay, yep, it broke it down. Great. Now that's great if you have all those TDD tests already in place. If you don't, like a number of code bases in my day job, we have tests, but not 100% test coverage. We might have 80% test coverage, which is good, but it's not going to give me the same level of confidence if I wanted to like refactor something. So like in those cases, I will take the time to try to codify at least how the code works now with an agent. Like have them write lots of tests. And again, this is the part where you have to be a little more mindful, is like you might not actually test what you think you're testing, but have them write tests first and then refactor if you can.
Yeah, this component where AI might not correctly understand the system behavior, right? And might just kind of simulate it or take some shortcuts is an important component, I guess, in everyone daily coding nowadays. How do you personally judge whether an AI generated test is useful or not? What's your personal criteria on that?
I think it depends on where the tests kind of lies in the stack of tests. If it's a unit test, I'm a little less concerned about like, is it useful, and more of just like, did it test what I thought it would? So like if I'm writing a test, or if I'm having my AI agent write a test that, tests a happy path, and I can look at it and see how it flows through the function, great. Or if I know I've got an edge case, like if, it gets handed the wrong variable or the wrong type and it fails, I want to see that. And that's the other thing, is like typing goes a long way, but that's a whole other discussion. But like at that level, unit tests, I'm happy to have as many unit tests as possible. I really don't care if there are hundreds or thousands, because I have a fast, computer to run it on, and my CI runners are fast too. They can churn through hundreds or thousands of tests in less than a minute. Where I'm very careful is when I get to the integration level, and in particular things like playwright tests. And that's where I try to encode like my intent of the application. I care more about does it do what I expect it to do? My code could be immaculately perfect on every unit test, but if it didn't solve the problem I wrote it for, it's useless.
Right.
So that's the kind of the levels I try to break it out into. Unit tests, as many as you want, fine. Have at least a good number of well-run playwright tests if you're doing like a web app. And then you can have trust on both levels, implementation and like intent.
It makes a lot of sense. So in other words, what you say is this unit test level, since it is coverage driven in the large sense, then you can delegate it to AI, and there it's doing pretty good job, even though sometimes it goes too small granularity. Like often you might ask to fix a specific thing in a text or anything, and then it tries to put the test for exactly this specific sign or whatever. And then you're like, it's useless. I would never do it. But then you say, it's okay, because then AI will kind of self-correct it in the next iteration, right?
Yeah. Actually, I ran into that exact thing earlier this week, where it had been it was just like a unit test, and it had been explicitly testing for like one string that was in my test database. And so when I ended up redoing it, I changed just like, I think it was just my seeding fixture for my database. And so I tasked the agent like, hey, I changed these fields in my seeds, go update my tests accordingly. And, credit where credit is due, it picked up, hey, this is a string that could change. We should just pull this as like a variable or an environment variable ahead of time. And so now if I change my seed again, it doesn't care, because it knows what it's looking for now. And it finds the seed from that seed file. Like, that gave me chills. I won't lie. That was like, hey, this is actually like really good improvements and reusability going forward. So yes, you do have to watch for those though. Like explicitly testing against a string is something I've caught it do a number of times.
Right. But also what you say, and I largely agree on that the higher you move in this classical testing pyramid, the more you have to take over this responsibility. And saying regarding end-to-end tests, for example, you really have to control and know that it's manageable, that it's scalable at the end, right? That not every change in your code must lead to changes in your end-to-end test. I would say that would be pretty bad testing design, and AI wouldn't probably help here, right?
No, if you had to rewrite your like integration level tests constantly, or your playwright like end-to-end tests constantly every time you made a code change, it would be a nightmare. Because you're driving a browser, playwright tests can take a while. Like I think my current like Greenfield app I was talking about, I think I have like 120 something playwright tests, which is a pretty decent coverage for a modest app. If I had to run those every time I like did any kind of test or any kind of check, it would be a 10-minute loop before I'd find out if my tests are green all the time. Because it takes several minutes to run. When I make a PR, I'll just let it run. I don't care. That's fine. It can run for 10 minutes, no problem. But I don't want that in my dev loop. I don't want that in my active process, because that would just be horribly painful.
Right. And that also, I think, brings this drifting risk that your end-to-end test might drift too much away from actual responsibility of whatever thing you are testing. And then if your end-to-end test doesn't test really the integrity of the components or the final result, then it also might be a really bad red flag for the whole system, right? Then you kind of silently degrade everything, and then AI takes over. This is the moment probably where you lose the control in your software development, and this is why vibe coding will never be a sustainable way to really go long term.
I think there will always be a place for engineering, right? Like actually thinking through problems, solving problems. And I can have all of the unit tests in the world. I can have tons of integration and end-to-end tests, but nothing replaces actually using the app. Like actually going through as a human, does it work the way I expect it to? You can never really encode like expectations of your software into like even an end-to-end test. So for example, if I'm building a calendar, there's been a billion calendar apps out there. What's one thing every good calendar app has? The ability to drag your meetings around on the calendar. That's something that an AI probably won't think about. Why? It doesn't have the concept of dragging. It's text. Can you represent it in text? Yeah, it'll do that all day long. But like what I expect out of my feeling when I'm using the app, that's something I don't know we'll ever have with AI. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll have those like world models that I've heard people talking about that can do amazing things. But as it is now, yeah, I focus on how does it actually feel to use my app and can I codify that? And where I do, I do.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And looking forward, let's imagine that in 2-3 years, AI will write twice as good code as today. Would it change your perspective on anything we have just discussed today?
I think we are probably approaching about the limit of what at least LLMs can do. I mean, I'm always surprised after every release how it's just a little bit better. And you kind of wonder where that curve will fall off. But like, let's say, for example, it's producing half as many bugs, right? Like we're trying to define like what's twice as good, like half as many bugs, in that kind of case, it would probably exceed most developers that I know as far as like actual writing of code. I don't know that it'll understand the architecture. I don't know if the concept of like reasoning through how it should work will be there. Because like, for example, my application has to do with like managing like visits, going to like home health and like helping like see different patients and keep track of who's been seen and by whom, when, things like that those kinds of interactions are not like well trained on yet. Like that's there's not a whole lot of apps out there, especially in the open source space, that are like that. But like if it could write twice as good code, then I do think that I will still probably ask it to do TDD, because I find what works well for human developers also works well for agents. So
it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
There is a reason why engineers adopt this TDD for project scalability. And in the best case, the LLM can be probably as good as the best human expertise. But it's hard to imagine that it will push these limits beyond in the most general sense, even though we see a lot of achievements. But another limitation that comes to my mind right now as we speak about it is also the context. It's related a bit to the refactoring and why you actually need to manage this process from time to time. Is because I see a lot of problems where, for example, LLM is a bit lazy just because it doesn't see some certain parts of the system in the context, and then it kind of just rewrites things, and that makes the whole system coupled, so it doesn't follow dry principle anymore. It tries to couple a lot of parts, and it really, at least currently, needs quite some effort to push to reuse the certain parts and say, hey, look at the system. Is it how in other modules it is done, or you invent something and then LLM is always, yeah, there is actually a component that is battle tested and everything is much better working. That probably is another part of it, and TDD also helps to prevent it, I think, in this direction, to have a better control and help, because the whole idea of TDD is also to accelerate the cycle that you mentioned in the beginning, that you write the new code and then you actually have a full test coverage that you can refactor much more easily. So largely agree on what you said for the TDD.
Yeah, I had exactly that situation where I didn't have, this was back before I had as many best practices encoded in my agent files, where I did have it like duplicate code in multiple places that did essentially the same thing. And once I told it that we need to be following dry principles and had it run over the code again, it actually flagged those. It was like, hey, this is basically doing, we should break this out into a module. We're using this all over the app. And it's like, hey, good job. That's what we need. And the funny thing is, if you do actually use the language like, dry principles, test-driven development, like if you do use them, it's been trained on all these coding books. It knows what those are. Like it can go and try to follow those principles reasonably well. Is it going to be perfect? No, but honestly, I'm not perfect as a programmer either. So
yeah, that makes sense. Maybe kind of a summarization of all what you just said. If someone wants to improve the way they code with AI starting tomorrow, what are the 2-3 concrete things you would recommend them to try first?
I would say my first thing would be make it like your goal in like going forward. Do not accept like less than 100% test coverage. It sounds crazy in normal development life cycles. Like the idea of spending a sprint or two writing just tests would be unheard of. But honestly, if you point it at one module, or if you touch that module, you touch that piece of code, just have it write tests for the rest of it in that file. It's going to take 60 seconds at most. Are they going to be perfect? No, but they're better than nothing. That would be my number one for anyone who's doing AI agent coding. The second one that I would do is like try to push and see how far the agent can go. I have side projects where I am trying my hardest to never write any of the code. Like I just want to see how far I can push it with the best practices, not necessarily vibe coding, but following best practices, keeping like my agent on task with guardrails like TDD, having good code review agents that follow along. All those things of like seeing how far I can push has kind of helped me find where those edges are so that like when I do work on a more serious project, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to trust it in, this particular part of my authentication code. I'm going to be a little more focused there, which makes sense, right? Like if it's a high impact, like your auth code, you should probably be a little more focused on it. If it's the UI for rendering in a map, maybe not as much. Now, if your whole app is mapping, maybe it does matter. But, it helps you, I would say like push how far you can go and try to focus on that. The other thing is like to experiment, like go out and see what other people are doing with skills. Like you don't have to write every skill yourself. Take what you find, adapt it for what works for you. Like, for example, one of Matt Pocock's skills, his whole workflow is GitHub driven. And so he keeps all of his issues or all of his specs are all GitHub issues. That's awesome. I hadn't really thought about it that way. I've always kept my specs and PRD documentation in my repo. But I'm like, maybe I try it and maybe I'll go and see if it works for me. If it doesn't, no problem. I just revert back to just running things locally. So like try new things. And just because you didn't write it doesn't mean it's not good. Like you can try a skill and see what happens. I love experimenting with just seeing how far you can go with things. And yeah, that's specifically what I would tell people who are trying to like get into agents and like get the most out of them. Go do those things. I think you'll have a good time.
I have to say this all makes a lot of sense. And I really like all 3 points that you just suggested. So number one is go and integrate the tests, even write them with AI to have something in place so that you have at least some coverage and protection, that your system even works and is maintainable. Then number two, what you said is also that you have to have this perspective on how far you can go, even though you don't have really time to implement everything perfectly. But try to really think if you had an infinite amount of time and infinite amount of capacity, like engineering capacity, right? How far you can go to really make everything perfect. And I have to say, I really find this perspective super helpful for every junior or middle or actually any engineer, because we all are limited in engineering experience and how far we think we know the things, right? And when you start thinking, what is the best possible thing I could possibly invent if I would be locked in a room for, let's say, 10 years, then suddenly you realize real quick that this is pretty limited in a sense that you always can be better, right? In 5 years, you will look back and say, hey, that was like really not the best. You should, of course, stay pragmatic. And this is probably also what you mentioned in the third component, in the third advice that you gave regarding experimenting more and trying to really involve it into your daily practices, because it's always something new, right? There is always something that will double your productivity long term and will make you even better.
Yeah, for sure. Also, it's really fun to kind of see some of the really old school programmers kind of coming out of retirement now that they have agents and like seeing what they do with them. Like, I never thought I'd see these folks writing code again, but here they are.
What do you see? What are share some story.
So the first one that comes to mind is Uncle Bob Martin. Like, he was the clean code guy. That was his thing. And he taught that for years at conferences. He ran an agency, I believe it was, that did like software development for companies. One of the people on the Agile Manifesto, I believe. And like to see him come out of the woodwork and be like, there's no excuse for low test coverage. There's no excuse for complex code. Tell your agent to reduce the complexity of the code. Give it a target with a deterministic skill or like a a checker of some kind to say like, oh, this code meets a complexity of 20 or whatever you choose, and just tell it to drive it down, get it to a lower point, give it a target, and it'll do it. It might take a while. You got to check it and make sure what it's doing is what you want. But like, for example, seeing him come out of basically retirement, like I hadn't heard from him for 10 years. And then like, he's starting to talk about agents in his bathrobe on his like porch or whatever.
This is his style. Yeah.
Yeah. People like Kent Beck. I just watched an interview with him talking about all the things he's trying with agents and like, you know, again, codifying those practices that they have been talking about for so long. I mean, like, can we make the agents do this? Basically, yeah. Like, you might have to codify it in a way that the agent can work together, but surprisingly, you can. And so it's really fun to see these very like senior developers who laid the groundwork that a lot of us stand on today, coming out of the woodwork and having fun with agents. And that just says something to me. I think that's great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And also, I think it's as relevant as never before, to be honest, because again, coming back to the Robert Martin and clean code, one of the perspectives he also always advocated for is to write this readable code, that your code is almost like a book that you can just go from top to bottom, always go deeper into all the details. And that's maybe also the concept that is still very, very relevant, I would say, because AI writes statistically plausible code that looks good, that works, especially with the tests, like you said, but also that you need to manage this depth in a readability depth, kind of technical depth, that you should definitely finally be able to come back to the code and understand what is it all about, and not just let AI infinitely grow in complexity.
One of like the biggest impact changes that I had, which I didn't expect, but like I've always had like, you know, like a good README and maybe like some documentation and markdown files, things like that. And that's originally how I started out doing my documentation with agents. I decided to task it with making like having docstring coverage. So like a chunk of a comment before every single function. I told it I want 100% docstring coverage that explains what the function does in just plain English before every single function. It took a while to do that, but now when I drop into the code, I can read that little blurb and then verify that is what I wanted. The side effect that I didn't expect was when an agent's reading, it's not taking the whole file. It typically takes just the function, maybe a little bit of before and a little bit behind when it's looking for like, you know, matching one particular thing that it needs to update. By including that documentation of what should happen, it catches that. And so like it knows the intent without having to go reference other documentation. The other thing that happens, again, I never thought this would have been such a big impact. Like my review agents. So one of the review agents I use is CodeRabbit. It will check your docstring. So if you change a function and you didn't update the doc string, it'll flag it and be like, hey, this intent no longer matches. That's wonderful. Like that's self-checking documentation in a way. And so yeah, like coupling that documentation with actual implementation, it worked really well. So I guess that would be another tip. If I could say like, do this, get your documentation with your code because agents like it. They really do.
Yeah, true. It is like a self-instruction layer that keeps them up long term. And is it also something what you have as a part of your continuous integration pipeline, that agents rewrite, append, extend, update the documentation?
I do. It is one of the checks is like, well, I typically use an agent tied into the PR to do that. Like, hey, did we update the code? Make sure that the intent of the doc string is still in place. But like, yeah, as part of that, like PR review process, I have an agent that checks my doc strings, and it will fail if I don't have doc string coverage. That's one of my gates on my CI/CD pipeline now, which it sounds a little absurd to have 100% doc string coverage, but you can get there with an agent now. It's really not that hard. So yeah. And I do this even on my like personal project, not even ones that like work. Like I just have this set up because again, what works and keeps things, you know, of higher quality for us human devs also does it for agents. So leverage those tools.
Right. That also sounds like a great summary of this episode, I would say, that AI should be smartly integrated. We should also still continue orchestrating it as a senior developers, not giving everything away in this expertise. test-driven development can help, experimentation is definitely worth exploring and never stopping there. So I love all your thoughts and all your sharings. Thanks a lot, Shep. Thanks a lot for joining and such a lovely conversation today. I really like the discussion also because it takes such a more serious side of AI-assisted development into consideration and not just the hype. I'm sure it will be very helpful for everyone taking the software development on seriously and doing it on a professional level. Thanks.
Happy to have this talk. It was great. Thank you.
And thanks really everyone listening this podcast today. Thank you for being part of it. I hope you was able to take multiple useful tips and advices. And if so, then feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more learning series together. And see you in the next one.